story, structure, character, dialogue, action description, everything has got to be as good as you can make it.
90% is 0% to them because it's not ready.
You cannot chase the market. The problem is what's in the theater today may have gone into development 10 years ago or 15 or 20 years ago.
William Akers is an incredible screenwriter, storyteller, author, and educator. And today we're going to sit down with him to talk about all of the insights he's learned over his incredible career. His famous tagline is "Your screenplay sucks," and it probably does, so does ours, but he's going to teach us exactly how we can take our screenplay from sucking to being great.
William, I have a question for you, a burning question. Can you walk us through how you learned how to write scripts?
I started off, all my life I'd wanted to be a cartoonist because that's just, I'd always loved the story comic strips in the newspaper, which is 6 days a week in a big Sunday page. And my favorite comic strip was called Taye and the Pirates. It had been done by Milton Caniff, and he was the absolute finest comic strip artist that there was, so I wanted to be like him. And the problem with comic story strips is they disappeared. When I was about halfway through college, they stopped putting story strips in the paper. They just were gag a day. And so what I had wanted to do all that time disappeared. And so I had to come up with something else to do, but I realized or felt like that a panel in a comic strip, 1, 2, 3 in a day, was like a movie. You've got a story with dialogue and action and an image. And I thought, okay, movies, it's like a comic strip that moves. And so I went to USC Film School after I got out of college. And the first screenwriting class I took, the teacher's name was Jim Boyle. And he taught us about structure, and he told us all these things we had to do. And we had an entire semester to write 40 pages of screenplay pages and an outline for the rest of the movie. So you wrote a whole outline for the story, then wrote the pages, and then had the outline that you turn in for the rest of it. My problem was that I'd written about something I knew nothing about. I was writing about a session musician, and I knew nothing about music. It was a stupid idea. And by the end of the semester, I just hated it. And so I went to the teacher and I said, because I got a great idea on Friday, just before the Monday that the thing was due, the 40 pages and the outline. And so I went to my teacher and I said, Jim, I have this great idea about the city of El Dorado, and it's an action-adventure thing with some romance, and it felt like more like what I could do. And he said, well, you have to keep one thing from the original draft. And I said, okay. I kept one sentence of action description, and then I threw away the rest of it. And in the weekend, I wrote 40 pages of brand new script after I'd done an outline, and turned all that in. I got an A. And that taught me a couple things. One, never write anything you don't have some kind of emotional connection to, some kind of knowledge about, whether you do the research or whatever you do. And then two, it got me over my fear of the blank page. 40 brand new pages in a weekend stopped that problem. So right after film school, I got out and I remembered and had been talking to my friends about a book that had been read to me in the 3rd grade, a novel called The Wolves of Willoughby Chase, which is an English children's adventure story. And I optioned the book and I wrote the script, and I was really pleased with it. And a friend of mine knew an actress, and I met her, and she was really nice, and she was famous and had a lot of power. So she said, if you give me your script, I'll read it, and maybe I can help you, which that was fantastic. And so I took the script up to the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles, dropped it off at the desk. I had another copy in my car, and I went down to my friend Steve Bloom's house, and he said, oh, let me read your script. And so I said, okay, here. And he read the entire thing right then as I was sitting in his living room. He was in his office, leaned back in his rocking chair, reading my screenplay that I just dropped off at the Chateau Marmont. And he came in and sat down and started giving me notes. Really intense, huge, explosively powerful notes that told me my script was absolutely not ready. And so I thought, oh my God, I've dropped it off and she's going to get it. And I got to call her up and whatever. So anyway, the hotel had lost the script. So she never saw it. And it took another 6 months to rewrite it. And then it got made. I gave it to a friend of mine in school. Another lesson learned. It's important who you know. I gave it to a friend of mine in school. She gave it to somebody. They gave it to somebody. They gave it to the woman that ended up producing the film. And so I learned there, for once and for all, the importance of getting notes, because my script needed that instruction from Steve, and then I was able to take his notes and then turn them into the script that eventually got sold. So that's how I got started writing screenplays. And so to sum it all up, it's just like being a concert pianist. You got to practice, practice, practice to get better.
Wow, that's such an incredible story. And this idea of story is very important to us, and we also know that it's very important to you. But why is storytelling so important to you, and why is screenwriting the perfect way of telling stories for you?
This is going to sound like a digression, but it's not. When I got married, I invited a minister to come down from Canada to officiate. And that poor guy, he had to go to rehearsal dinners every Friday night and listen to drunk people read stuff that they thought was hilarious. I just thought, what a miserable thing to have to do. And that didn't happen at my rehearsal dinner because the people got up and they spoke, and it was very emotional and heartfelt, and they were incredibly good at it. And when it was over, he came to me and he said, I was completely unprepared for the level of oratory in the South. My grandfather's from Louisiana. My father, he started telling stories to me when I was tiny. My father told me stories. I grew up telling stories. And I really like getting a reaction out of people, an emotional reaction over something I've written or something that I've just told. So that's been always been a lot of fun. And so that's what got me into storytelling. But after I got out of college, I started writing screenplays. And so screenplays came really naturally to me because it's an image and it's dialogue and you're telling a story and you're trying to get an emotional reaction. And so that's how I got into screenwriting.
I think that's something actually Spencer and I can really relate to, is this connection we want to build in this world. The page is just kind of our vessel to do so. It's magical, it's emotional, it's all the things we love about this world. So yeah, I think that's beautiful.
It makes a huge difference if you're connected to the material. If the story matters to you, no matter what it is, if it really matters to you and you can put that into your characters, it can be the strangest story in the world, and it's really going to matter to the people who read it or the people who see it on screen.
William, in your book, Your Screenplay Sucks, we have it right here, and we'll touch on this a little bit later. You make a point that regardless of how good your story is, the movie won't get made if the prospects don't read the whole script or find it compelling from a business standpoint. How do you, or us as filmmakers and creatives, screenwriters that is, write a story that is both creative and balances the nuances of, I guess, making it attractive to the business?
That's a hard question. It really matters that you sell it, for one thing, but it really matters that you have a good time writing it. So you've got to enjoy what you're doing. You cannot, in my opinion, you cannot chase the market. You can't say, this is what's happening right now. Look at that in the theater. I'm going to write something like that. The problem is what's in the theater today may have gone into development 10 years ago or 15 or 20 years ago. You watch people win Academy Awards and they say, I've been working on this for 20 years. So when that guy started working on it, he had no idea what the market was going to be when he finally sold it, when the movie came out. And so you can't guess what you want to need to write about unless it's something that really, really matters to you. And I think going to producers or agents and saying, what do people want? What do you want? They're going to say, I want this or I want that, but they don't know what they really want. What they want is something they've never seen before, but they can't tell you what that is because they've never seen it. And so you've got to do something that you think is good, that you think is going to be worthwhile, that you think somebody's going to buy, and then just try it. And if it doesn't sell, you've learned something, and hopefully you had a good time and enjoyed the process. Because if you don't like the process and you're only in it for the money and the money doesn't come, that's going to be incredibly disappointing. And so I'm a big advocate of write things that interest you, write things. You don't have to write what you know, I don't think, but you have to write something you're interested in, whether it's the people or the situation or the times or whatever it is. Figure out what attracts you to it, and if it really works and you've written a good script, it will attract other people.
Yeah, I really love what you said there. Taye and I have this saying that's,
Oh boy.
if all you want is to walk on the red carpet, then you'll never get there, because that's not what it's about and that's not what it takes to get there. So I really love that point that you made. And one of these kind of defining aspects in the stories that we're telling are our characters. Characters define so much of all of these films that we love, whether that's Indiana Jones, Marty McFly, or any of these people. How do we define characters in film, and do you have any certain strategies for kind of giving them unique voices and creating these larger-than-life personalities?
So one thing that's really important about the character voices, in fact, it's really kind of the most important thing in a way, is they can't sound like each other, and they can't sound like you. It's really actually hard to do to make them not sound like you. One thing I do to separate the voices out, because this person has to sound like this and this person has to sound like that, and then again, as I said, they can't sound like you, is sometimes I write for dead actors or living actors. I wrote a script relatively recently for Cary Grant. I know exactly how he talks. And so I was able to put him on the page. Nobody's going to offer the film to him, but they'll offer it to somebody who'll recognize that this sounds like somebody who's real. My Fall of Saigon script, I did that same thing for Jack Nicholson. He was too old for the part, but I knew how he talked. And so I wrote it for him. That's a fun way to move forward, is just hearing it in your head from either an actor that you know or a person that you can know. A person that you know, you could write for the kid that sat next to you in fourth grade if you want to. When I write and I've got a draft, is I go and search through the draft, all caps, that character's name. And what that'll do is it'll only find their dialogue all the way through the story. So you just pop to their dialogue, their dialogue, their dialogue, and you can immediately tell if it's beginning to sound like another character or if it sounds like you, or even more important, you can make sure that all the way through they sound like they're supposed to sound, that they're talking the way you want them to talk. And one way to get that accurate is to give each character an adjective. One adjective that's them all the way through. Unless they're the main character, then you give them two, because they'll probably have a character change, so their adjective would change from the beginning to the end. And then you can tell, like in Finding Nemo, the father is overprotective. That's his whole deal, is he's overprotective. And so that's the adjective that he goes through until he has a character change. And so you can look at their dialogue and go, is this that adjective? So that's another way to do it, to look at it. But it's really important to have the characters sound different.
So do you think as aspiring screenwriters, it's like we should spend a lot of time reading existing screenplays?
Nah.
And really like...
Don't bother. Just make up your own stuff. It'll be great. No, yes, I think you should read scripts, old scripts, brand new scripts, especially stuff that's recent, so you get a feel for how scripts are looking now. But read everything. Okay. I mean, for a lot of reasons, read everything. One, because the people you're going to be having business meetings with, they've seen everything and they've read everything. You wouldn't believe how many times I've taught students who said, oh, I don't watch movies. I'm going, why are you here? And then I had students that said, well, I don't read screenplays very often. I mean, God, if I were learning to write, and I read scripts now and I know how to write. And so, yeah, read scripts as much as you can, because it will inform you. You'll be a much better writer because of it. Great, yes, absolutely. Read as many as you can.
That's amazing. Okay.
Yeah,
We got to read more
that's a great
scripts.
piece of information.
That's fantastic. All right.
Hold on, let me be the old geezer for a second and talk about, you didn't know how hard it was when I was a child. There's scripts on the internet like crazy. They're everywhere. When I started, the only place you could get a screenplay was to drive down Sunset Boulevard or Hollywood Boulevard and buy a script at a store. It's the only place that sold them. It's the only way to get them. And so there's no excuse for not reading a lot of scripts these days.
Imagine driving. That's a
What
crazy
even
image.
kind of store would you buy that from? Like, was it just at your local...
Is that a newsstand or is
I
that...
think it was called, no, it was a cinema screenplay store. It may have been called Larry Edmunds, but that may be a different company. I can't quite
And so was
remember
that something that only aspiring filmmakers would kind of go and buy, or would people just do that as entertainment?
Well, maybe, it doesn't sound like entertainment to me. But here's one thing, and this made it really hard, if you're going to try to write a spec episode of a television show, I mean, it doesn't matter what it was like then, but because it's not what it's like now, but there was no videotape. And so you had to watch the show as it aired to figure out what you were going to write in your episode. And you also had to find the scripts, and the only place to get them was get them at the store.
Wow.
Or have a friend who worked in television who could give you the scripts.
I think how we value scripts and the accessibility to scripts. If I want to look up Baz Luhrmann's entire filmography, entire screenplays.
And you
I can
should.
Google. I do. Believe me, I do. But I can Google that and just print out a PDF.
Yeah, which I guess is like a big asset that we have that maybe previous generations of filmmakers haven't.
I forget those elements of privilege.
Well, you would never know, so it doesn't matter. It's ridiculous. Like when I started in film school, they were teaching us about the two kinds of sound recording that had already gone away. Even back then, nobody cared about the history of something. Just tell me what I got to know today.
I find that interesting because we speak with a lot of filmmakers, and usually people like our peers in our in college, they're always like very romantic about the past. They're very like obsessed with film and like actual film stock and all these like old traditional means of filmmaking. But the people we speak to are often like, it was terrible back then. Like, just leave it behind. So
It was so hard. Yeah. I mean, I just literally yesterday had a conversation with a cinematographer. He's younger than I am, but he knows his stuff. Being a cinematographer now is so much different than it was at the beginning. For one, the lights, simple, the lights don't get hot.
Right, LEDs, yeah.
So you don't have to worry about, one of the things we were taught in film school is whatever you do, don't raise the light up near the ceiling and get near the sprinkler system and set off the sprinkler system in the entire building. That doesn't happen now because the lights don't get hot. That's just one tiny thing that's different and much, much easier.
Okay, shifting gears here a little bit. William, in a previous conversation that you and I had, I asked you, when does one know if they received good notes? And I loved your response because, first of all, you took a minute to kind of respond, and I kind of liked that because I felt like I had a good question. But you gave me a really amazing response that I found compelling, and I even told Spencer about it. Can you kind of, break down what you actually said? And I have your quote right here.
Please.
No one wants notes until they need them.
Well, it's like me with my first screenplay, the one where I dropped it off at the hotel. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know I needed the notes. I thought I was done, which is one of the most important things about notes is get them even when you think you don't need them, and be open to the notes. Be really open to the notes. So one answer to the question, other than the one I gave you, was I think that people realized they needed the notes when they suddenly realized they've got a metric ton of rewriting they got to do, which was me sitting at my friend Steve's house. I thought, I got a lot left to do. And that's the great thing about notes, is they're there to help you, but you can't reject the notes. You have to be open to the notes and want the notes. And I feel that a lot of beginning writers, I know it, a lot of beginning writers just want praise. And that's not going to help them, but they just want to have praise showered on them. My wife took a painting class at the university I used to teach at, and so she's 3 times older than the students. So she came in and she said, I don't want to hear anything good about my paintings. I have no interest in hearing any praise about my painting. I want to know what I can do to improve it, because that's all she wanted. And that's a good attitude for somebody who needs to get notes. First of all, when you're about to get notes, you need to understand the degree of difficulty of this thing you're trying to do. It's really hard to write a good script. It's really hard to write a good poem. It's just hard. Writing's difficult. And so I don't know anybody who doesn't have a writer's group around them to give them notes. I've got mine, and I hope you got yours. It's just really important to have a bunch of people to help you, because I don't know anybody who does it alone. So that's really important, and to listen to them and take care of them. The people that give you notes, treasure them, buy them lunch, thank them a lot, be glad that they're giving you the notes. Take the notes that they give you and write them all down. That's really important. Even if you think it's a dumb note, write it down, because what might be a dumb note today, later on after another week or two of rewriting, that note that you did write down but didn't want to, that may be the game changer. So always write it all down, and never argue with a note unless you're explaining why you're doing something. But don't tell the guy that's giving you the notes that they've done it wrong and they don't understand your great idea because blah, 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 blah. Do y'all know who William Goldman was? Does that name ring a bell?
Familiar, but I don't think so.
Have you heard of the movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid?
Yes.
And The Princess Bride?
Yes.
Okay, he wrote those. So he was like the greatest living screenwriter until he died. So a friend of his had a son who wrote a screenplay, and the friend said, "Hey, Bill, would you give my son notes?" And Bill said, "Sure, I'd be happy to." So they meet for coffee. So Goldman is at the coffee shop, and he opens the screenplay, and he starts going through, and he says, "I got a couple of problems with Act One." And he goes through, and he talks about Act One, and every single thing he says, this young writer refutes the note and argues with him and tells him why he's wrong. So Goldman gets to the end of Act One, and he closes the script, and he slides it over to him, and he said, "The rest of it is fine." Which meant this kid had a chance at getting notes from the best screenwriter in the business, and he blew it because he argued, which is not what you want to do. You've got to be open to the notes. And like Ben Fitzgerald, who wrote Passion of the Christ, he wrote a sequel called Miriam, and he was the smartest writer I know. He's unbelievably good, and he asked me if I'd read the script and give him notes, and I did. When I called him on the phone, most successful independent film in the history of independent films up until that time, and that guy was, I could hear it in his voice, he was worried about what I was going to tell him. Was I going to, say something bad about his script or make him have to do rewrites or whatever? If he was worried about it, it's okay for anybody to be worried about it. Norman Steinberg, who wrote Blazing Saddles and My Favorite Year, he had a 60-year writing career. And he wrote a Broadway play, and he asked me if I'd give him notes. And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to." He said, "If you can't summon brutal honesty, I'm not interested in your opinion."
Wow.
That's a guy who only wanted his work to get better. And so that's my feeling on notes. They're very important. I can't live without them. I got to have them. And if you don't get them, it's like unbelievably important to get notes and to receive the notes and be thrilled to get them, even if they're telling you your script's not ready. Because all you want to do is to give it to an agent or give it to a producer and have them love it. But if it isn't ready, that's a problem. You wouldn't believe how many times I've seen this happen. People at a writing conference or something, they give someone a script and say, "Here's my script. Thank you very much for reading it. There's some stuff I got to fix in Act 2, but I really hope you like it." No, make it perfect. Because you're only going to get one shot at whoever that person is. Yeah. That's the thing. If so-and-so says they're going to read your script, they'll read it. But they're not going to read the whole thing unless it really, really, really works. I mean, that's incredibly important. I could talk about notes all day long, but because I just think I live and die by the notes that I get, and I know how important it is for your writers group to give you notes. The one thing that concerns me, in a way, there's nothing I can do about it, is what do you do if in your writers group, the best writer in your writers group has no professional experience? What are you going to do to get up to a level above that and everybody in the group get up to that level? And the only thing I can think of is you got to pay somebody to give you notes, which is what my business partner Hillary and I do. But other than that, I don't know how to do it. I mean, I've had my writers group. They're all really experienced writers, and so they've been, they make a living all the time doing that stuff. So that's who I'm getting notes from. One thing, bouncing back to beginners. I've got a friend who's done, I don't know how many television episodes. He's got 65 credits on IMDb as a director. And he will not read anything by a beginner because he's tired of wasting his own time with people who won't pay any attention to what he says. Mm-hmm. I've only kept 3 New Year's resolutions in my life. One of them is not really about notes, but it says, if you ask for advice, take it.
I think that's incredibly important. And Taye and I have had a conversation around this idea that the currency of a writer is a finished script. Because back to this idea of what you're saying, like a 90% script, if you hand it to a producer, a director, or whoever is going to potentially get it made, 90% is 0% to them because it's not ready.
Yeah, it's either ready or it's not ready. As I told you, I gave my first screenplay to a friend who gave it to somebody who gave it to somebody. When I wrote my children's book, I was working on it. I had a draft, and I mentioned to a friend in New York that I was working on this children's book. And he said, "Oh, I've got a friend that's a publisher. She'll read your book." And one thing that was nice about my book, it was very easy for him to tell her the story in one sentence. Because when you have a pitch that you can give, it's generally not useful unless someone else can hear it and give it to their boss. So anyway, he told this woman, there's this guy's writing this book, and she said, oh, I'd love to read it. So he told me. So I emailed her and said, hey, I've got a draft. I'm working on it. I'll be happy to send it to you when I'm done. She emailed back and said, oh, please do. I can't wait to read it. Well, first of all, if I dropped dead the next day, she wasn't going to miss not reading my screenplay. But 6 months later, I emailed her and I said, hey, I'm still working on it. I'll send it to you when I'm done. She said, thank you very much. Let me know. I knew she could say yes. You rarely, ever are in a room with someone who could say yes. But she could. And so 6 months after that, which is now a solid year after I had a draft, had to rewrite, and I couldn't do anything. I was done. And so and my writers group said, you're done. And so I emailed it to her, and they bought it 3 days later. And the editor said, which was nice for me, one, they bought it. That was nice. But the editor said, rarely do we see a book that's this ready to go. And this is true, they had no changes in the book. I think they found 2 typos in an 80,000 word book. And then they wanted the order of things in the last chapter rearranged. That was their big note. Change the order of stuff in the last chapter. So it didn't take long to fix. But I knew she could say yes. And I knew that I was never going to you'll never get another shot at them. And so that's why you got to take the time to make it as good as you can possibly make it. And that means story, structure, character, dialogue, action description. Everything has got to be as good as you can make it.
That's an incredible story, and I think there's a lot of lessons woven in there. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you.
Okay. So we often hear of this theory, or maybe it's even a fact, I'm not sure how I feel about it, that all stories have been written. If every story's been written, why are movies still made, and why do we go to the theater for these stories?
Because not every story has been written. There's like 2 or 3 left to write, I think, maybe 7. So I don't think every story has been written. I think there's plenty stories left to write. Hopefully I got some left in me. I'm sure you got some in you. And in the way you approach the story, the way I approach the story are going to be completely different. I mean, if you give me a one sentence description of a story and say, come up with an act 1, your act 1 is going to be different than mine, although we will adhere to the same description. Let's say you watch a bank robbery movie, or you want to write a bank robbery movie. If you can put you in it, how would you write a bank robbery movie that really, really matters to you, or has something from your character or your soul or your father in it? It's going to be different than one I'm going to write, or it's going to be different than one someone down the street's going to write. Let me give you, I got a list of bank robbery movies. Each one of these is a bank robbery movie or a heist film, and they're all completely different from the other one. And so it's just to me, it's very exciting that you can write kind of the same thing, but it's going to be wildly different. So The Getaway with Steve McQueen, Topkapi, The Italian Job with Mark Wahlberg, Happy New Year, which is a French film, Sexy Beast, that's amazing, Best Bad Guy Ever, Rififi, The Killing, Charlie Varick, The Great Train Robbery with Sean Connery, Bellman and True. I hope you can find that somewhere because it's out of this world good. Midnight Run, Ocean's 11, 11 Harrow House, and then the best TV series to come along the last 20 years, Money Heist. So those are all robbery movies or heist films, and they're all wildly different one from the other. And so what you inject into it is what's going to give it that special sauce. And if the more of you that's in it, especially if it's a television series, the harder it is to fire you. Because if it's you, they can't get rid of that special sauce.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's a great point. And I think that's such a great example, this idea that there's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of bank heist movies, and yet we still see new ones. Like Money Heist isn't that old. It's a pretty recent thing, and it took the world by storm. So I think that's a great point. And yeah, I think you're right. Not all stories have been written, and I don't know that they ever will.
No, I think there's going to be more and more good ones, and they're going to take, a guy walks into a bar, and how many guy walks into a bar jokes have you heard? They all start that way, and then they're all different.
I've written a few too.
I mean, look at Hallmark. Look at Lifetime. They make Christmas stories and Christmas stories and Christmas stories. Have all the Christmas stories been written? I don't think so. There's so, every year there are like 90 more Christmas stories, it seems like. Have you seen the movie? Have you seen Run Lola Run?
I don't think so.
Oh, write that down. So Run Lola Run is another robbery movie. And Tom Tykwer, who's a German director and writer, and he's incredibly talented, he did Babylon Berlin way after Run Lola Run. But Run Lola Run is an amazingly well-told, really interesting story. And the end of Act One would just blew the audience out the back of the theater. Do not read anything about it. Just find it and watch it. And don't know anything, and it'll blow your mind. So that's a robbery movie that no one had ever told a story that way before. So you can be inventive. Be inventive.
Okay, switching gears again, William. We're gonna shift over to Your Screenplay Sucks.
Okay.
This is a book that you have written. I've read I'm almost finished with it, actually. I love it a lot.
Thank you.
I love it a lot. But that's besides the point. Let me ask my questions. All right. Can you tell us where the idea for the book came from? What was your process for getting the book made?
It was the book I needed for my students to use in class. That was one way to think about it. I've been writing screenplays for a long time. I'd been teaching for a long time, and I've been giving script notes for a long time. So I knew the mistakes beginning writers made. And they not all make the same mistakes, but man alive, there were a lot of common errors that pretty much everybody did. And so the book, as it came about, can sort of a checklist of things. Don't do this with your story. The book actually came about because of two things. One, I was at a writing conference in Chicago, and the night before I was supposed to leave, I saw a book on a table and I bought it, and it was Save the Cat by Blake Snyder.
Yes.
And I read it that night. It's a great book. It's really, really good. So then I get my stuff and I'm headed out to go to the plane. And I stop in the cafeteria at the university before I get out of Chicago. And there's Blake Snyder sitting there having breakfast by himself. And I said, I think your book is absolutely amazing. Can I sit down and talk to you? And you say somebody, your book's amazing, they perk up. And so anyway, we got to be really good friends. So then cut to a while later, I got invited to go speak out at UNLV in Las Vegas. And I thought, well, and I'm a big handout guy. And so I thought, well, I can't go and speak to this room full of students, or actually it's a theater full of students, without a handout. And so I put one together. It turned out to be 100 pages long. And I thought, well, 100 pages? That's a book. And so I said to Blake, hey, I got this idea about a checklist for stuff not to do. And he said, I can sell that. And so that's how Your Screenplay Sucks happened, was those two things, this lecture at UNLV and meeting Blake Snyder.
That's amazing.
So that's how it got sold. And I've been very happy with the book. It's done well. It's taken me all over the world to give speeches. So that's fun.
This is a flaw that's kind of known in the dorm room here, is that I'm a voracious reader, and it's a huge addiction for me. My father, who is an educator, sends me a box of books every month for me to read, and we love teachers. I love my dad, but it's something that's always been a part of my life. At Christmas Day, there were books under the tree, and I always have books open when I'm writing my scripts. So whether it's a film book checklist like Your Screenplay Sucks, or something like J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye, or F. Scott Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby, I need a reference to not only ground the words, not just ground the world, but ground my characters in the worlds I'm trying to build. It's huge for me, yes. And this is a great addition.
Reading makes all the difference in the world. I mean, I think you have to read if you're going to be a writer. I'll tell you an interesting story about Great Gatsby. Have you ever heard of a writer named Hunter S. Thompson?
I don't believe so, no.
Look him up.
Okay.
He's unusual.
Okay.
He was working for Time magazine and was bored and wanted to be a writer. And he thought, well, how can I be a writer? I don't really know how to write. So what'll I do? And so he sat down and he admired two writers. One was F. Scott Fitzgerald and the other was Ernest Hemingway. And so he was at work at Time magazine and he propped up The Great Gatsby, I think it was The Great Gatsby, and typed it up. Just copied the entire book and typed it while he was supposed to be doing other, but he looked like he was working. And then he did the same thing for, I think it was The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. Well, he learned how those guys wrote sentences because he typed up the entire book. That's intense. And that's a way to learn from reading, is you get the other person's work in you and you decide what you like and what you don't need, and you can figure out who you are as a writer by reading other people's stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this book has been such a blessing to the world of aspiring screenwriters. So I just want to express my gratitude on behalf of the entire writing community that you've provided us with this tool, because, you know, a lot of times writing advice, it's very, like, so...
Unattainable.
Right, it's not actionable. We see things be like, oh, you know, write what's in your soul. And it's like, that's helpful in the macro, but it's also like, I don't know what to do on the micro. Whereas what I love about this book is every single point you're making, all 100 of these reasons why your screenplay sucks, are like directly actionable. And it's something I feel like I can take today and implement into my writing. And
it's accessible. Like, I know what you're talking about. I'm in this particular moment in time where I need to hear this particular piece of logic to help me move forward.
It's a thank you very much. It was great to hear. I mean, the book came out 17 years ago, and it's really nice to know that it's still valid, except for, well, here we go. Here's the screenplay. It's got 2 Brads in it. That's one of the few things that's changed about screenwriting, is the number of Brads, because there are no Brads anymore. You just email them a PDF. But I'm glad the book is still valid. One of the things that I'm happy in the book, that's in the book, is all that stuff in the middle about writing a better sentence and how to make your sentences better. Script Reader Pro says that book's the best screenwriting book there is, and that's one of the reasons they really like it, is because I spend so much time teaching people how to massage their prose and get it better. The reason for that, I've got my particular reason for that, is when someone picks up your script, and they've agreed to read it, whether it's an agent or a producer or an assistant or just a reader somewhere, they don't know if they read your page 1, if you can write great dialogue, or if you can understand a character arc, or you know where the act break needs to be, or can write a good act break. But they can tell if you can write a sentence. And if you can't, they're going to know on page 1. I mean, literally, they can tell on page 1 whether they want to keep reading. I've got a former student in Los Angeles. He was in management, and so he read a lot of scripts. And he knew by page 3 if he wanted to keep going. And a lot of that is just how the words are on the page, what your sentences are like. And so I'm very happy that that's in the book, because I think it's incredibly helpful.
yeah, it's been incredible to read, and we'll continue referencing it, I think, for our entire careers. So to continue moving on, within the book itself, I really appreciate how direct and blunt you are with the wording. It makes it very enjoyable to keep turning each page. And I was kind of just wondering, why did you decide to write the book in that way and make that deliberate choice for how you presented this information?
Well, let's see. Well, first of all, as I've already said, notes that are namby-pamby, sugar-coated notes don't really help anybody. So being blunt may as well, because the thing is if I'm not blunt in the book, then when the agent's going to be blunt when they read it, or the producer or whoever it is, they're going to be blunt. They're not going to worry about your feelings. They're going to worry about here's the thing about a script, is if you give me your script to read and I read it and I don't like it, I say, this is wonderful. You did a great job. Well done. Best script I've read all year. That means you can't tell really sometimes. If I write you a check, that means I liked it. But the other way to know if somebody liked your script is you give me your script and I said, I got a director friend in LA. I want him to read this. Or I've got an editor friend in LA. She knows a lot of people. I'm going to get it to her. So if someone takes this thing you gave them and they give it to someone else, that means they're risking their capital with that other person. They're risking it on your script. And so that's why you got to be blunt, because everybody will be all the time.
Yeah. No, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I genuinely love that that's the way the book is presented, because it doesn't feel like there's a lot of fat. Like, I feel like I get a nugget of wisdom every sentence in the book. And I think that's what makes it so easy to keep reading more of it, is because it's just piece of wisdom after piece of wisdom after piece of wisdom. So as far as like the return on the time spent reading, it's just so high that I just keep turning the page.
Well, good. Thank you. That was the goal, is to keep turning the page and make your friends buy the book.
Yes.
Of course.
I think we've sold a few. I think we have.
I think we have.
yeah.
We have.
Most definitely. All right. A thought we've had recently, William, is centered around structure. The 8-sequence structure. You and I have talked about this in the past, but I wanted to kind of ask a question regarding formula, and a fear that Spencer and I have is centered around this. So we love structure. We love outlines. Both Spencer and I are very kind of structured, analytical writers, or at least in the beginning we are. Can you kind of give us some thoughts, or just how you feel about blending both the beauty that is formula and structure with holding the creative kind of passion? Not that those are in any way separate, but having them be synonymous and marry them in this artful craft that is a good screenplay.
Well, first of all, if there was a formula, really, anybody could sell a screenplay. I mean, I think a way to look at the word, because formula is really kind of pejorative these days. I think that if you said recipe, people might be a little more open to it. For some reason, people resist structure. I don't understand why. It's sort of a mystery to me, because 8-sequence, 3-act structure works. Why not do that, especially if you're a beginner? Exactly. Try it out. It's worked for a long time, so give it a whirl. That's one thought. Jean-Luc Godard, the French director, said a story should have a beginning, a middle, and an end, but not necessarily in that order, which I think that's right on the money. I mean, what is it? Pulp Fiction's a 3-act structure story. It's all chopped up and moved around, but if you spread it out in beginning to end, it's 3 acts. So even that crazy movie, which is unbelievably good, that's a simple 3-act structure, and it works great.
One of our favorite movies, our sound mixer's smiling at me right now. He loves that film, and we debate around the quality of the writing all the time.
In Tarantino's film?
That's right, Pulp Fiction.
So a friend of mine worked for him, and she made that look like a screenplay. He does not write terribly well words on the page, and so she took his words and put them in the order that made sense and cleaned it up so it didn't have misspelled words. And so his assistant, who's a dear friend of his also, she made that thing readable, which is fine. Make sure it looks like what the people are expecting. Sure. It can be wildly creative, but it's got to fit the format, it's got to read well, and all that stuff. I mean, thinking about a recipe, I was talking about in a formula, is if you want to be a painter and you want to paint gray, you want the color gray, you got to follow the recipe, you got to follow the formula, whatever you want to call it. It's burnt umber, ultramarine blue, and white. That makes gray. If you don't do that, it ain't going to be gray. So why not do that? But then as soon as you figure out how to make gray out of those 3 colors, you can start improvising. You can use warm white instead of titanium white. You can add a little red into it, which is going to change it. It's still going to be gray, but it's going to be a little different gray with the red in it, depending on whether it's quinacridone red, which I think I mispronounced, or cadmium red light. That's going to be different. So your recipe, your structure for your story, you got to adhere to the main rules, like burnt umber or raw umber, whichever one it is. I have it written down, but I can't remember it. And the ultramarine blue and the white. That's your basic, that's your 3-act structure, but you can get in there and change things around all you want to. I mean, so you can get very creative within guardrails and do great work while still, sticking with the structure.
Right. So it's almost like the story structure is kind of the framing, the bare bones of a house, but then you still get to finish it with, whatever brick you want or wood or whatever kind of siding and furnishing it in all these different ways. And so... Yeah, I think that's a good way to outlook on it.
And what color you paint your playroom and what color I paint mine, that's going to be different.
Right.
But the house, it's a great analogy because the house has got to stand up.
Yeah.
If the house falls apart, your foundation wasn't any good, your structure wasn't any good, and your script's not going to be any good. Meaning you can be fancy pants in all the dialogue all you want to, but if the structure doesn't work, it ain't going to work.
And so do you think there are any circumstances in which you deliberately don't use these kind of structure tools or break them? And if so, how do you know when you're doing that for something that's going to enhance the film compared to subtract from it?
because your readers group is going to tell you. I mean, you can do anything you want to, and if it works, great. I mean, that's for sure. If your idea is new and interesting and works, then you're fine. But if it doesn't work, somebody's got to tell you, and you got to listen. When I was in film school, the very first semester, is we were going around the room showing our little 5-minute films that we'd sweated blood to make, and this one of them didn't make any sense at all. And the guy was upset that we didn't get his movie. And he said, "It's a personal film. You're not supposed to understand it." I thought, well, maybe not. But it'd be better if we had. And he disappeared halfway through the semester. But so they got to understand it. I mean, here's the recipe to go off of what you just asked me. This is the best recipe for any kind of story, period. Structure, unstructured, everything. Don't be boring. Do that. Right. And you're a long way down the road.
Yeah, and yeah. I love how the way you present this is you're acknowledging, you're aware of the importance of the structure, but also you still believe in the importance of bringing your own flavor and your own nuances to it. So I really appreciate that.
It really is like guardrails. You can be going 95 miles an hour down 4 lanes of interstate with the guardrails on either side of you, and you can wave all you want to back and forth, and you'll be safe. But if you're blowing 95 or 100 miles an hour and there are no guardrails, you may just go sailing off into nothing. They keep you in at least in the road. I think that's important.
So this is kind of a slightly unrelated question, but if someone's an aspiring writer and they have a script that they feel really good about, they've shown it to their peer groups, they're getting the feedback, they're taking the proper time to implement those and iterate on all these things, and they're doing the steps. But now they're at a point where they don't necessarily know someone to send the script to in the industry or any of these things. What are some actionable steps they might be able to take to try to get the script in the right hands?
That's tough. Marry somebody whose father runs a studio. That would be a start.
That sounds like a script right there.
Yeah, so put that at the top of your list. Meet people. Meet people. I mean, there's social medias out there, and that's a way to meet people and get connected and find like-minded people. Go to Los Angeles, go to New York, go to Atlanta, and meet people there. Go to writing conferences, go to film festivals. Go to film festival, you can talk to the filmmakers at a film festival. And you can get people to read your script. Not easy, but you could. I mean, this is hard to do, is be charming. If you're weird and strange and can figure out a way not to act weird and strange, you're better off. What you don't want to do is be paranoid. Let's say I'm a famous director and you meet me at a festival and you say, "Would you read my script?" And I think we've had a good time talking. You seem like you got your act together. And I say, yeah, I'll read it. Say, "Would you sign this NDA, please?" That ain't going to work. Because what they don't want to deal with is someone who's paranoid. Right. And so if you show any slight evidence of paranoia, like don't on your title page say Registered Writers Guild, copyright this and that. You can register it and copyright it, but don't shout it out on your title page, because that looks like you're afraid they're going to steal it from you, and they don't want to deal with people who are paranoid. So meet people, be relentlessly polite, be persistent but not pushy, and that's a tough line to know what the difference is. If you meet somebody and they don't read your script for 2 months, don't worry about it. Wait 4 months and then give them one tickle. Say, "Hey, I'm giving you a nudge here. Thank you very much. If you can get to it, let me know, blah, blah, blah. I look forward to hearing." And then after that, give up. Because you can't drive them crazy. And if they're never going to get to it, they're never going to get to it. There's a chapter in my book about sort of this same thing. And you wouldn't believe how often this comes up in real life, is never attribute to malice something that could be stupidity. Like, let's say I'm a Mr. Big Time and you say, "Would you read my script?" And I say, "Yeah," and then you don't hear from me. I mean, that's why you can get a nudge. But what you don't want to do is call me up and say, "Why haven't you read my script, you jerk?" I had a guy, a producer, a big-time producer, didn't read my script. And I was kind of thinking, I need to call him and get hold of him, and and I didn't do anything. And then finally I found out that he had had a plane crash, and he didn't die, but my script burned up on the plane, and he lost all the contact information so he couldn't find me. But had I yelled at him, that would have lost that contact because I was patient. I didn't.
Right.
So you never know what's going on, but be polite. Meet people and keep track of who people are and what you talked about. And so then when you see them next time, or you give them an email, say, let's go to coffee, you will remember what you talked about the last time. You've got to be businesslike. And which is not that hard to do because a lot of people are not businesslike. And so if you are, you'll kind of rise above the group. Again, always be polite. Right? Oh, here you go. Write, if you ever get an opportunity to, write thank you notes. Thank you notes are unbelievably important and incredibly rare. And so if you write a well-written thank you note, there's some of your writing that they can read. But write thank you notes, it blows people away and they really like it. And so that's advice from your grandmother. That she's right on the money. Write thank you notes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's super important. And if you want to stand out in a crowded market, because we all want to be screenwriters, we all want to be directors, we all want to make movies. And I think it is those little things that can separate you, because that's like comes down to your character and who you are, and people care about that.
Well, who you are matters because, especially in television, they got to be locked in a room with you all day, every day, all the time for months.
Yeah.
If you're in a writer's room. So you got to be pleasant, easy to get along with, not a pushover to deal with, and have an opinion, but you've got to be enjoyable.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's definitely an important point. You've been educating us a lot today on screenwriting. You've been educating a lot of people through your book as well, but that education even goes beyond the page. You also have an online course and mentoring program called Keys to Storytelling. What about that format and teaching people online and through that space is impactful in a way that maybe the book isn't? Like, how is that additive, and how do they work together to create this edifice that is storytelling education?
Okay, thank you for asking. A key to storytelling, and that's the word two is T-O, it's not a number two. We're on keytostorytelling.com, and we're on Instagram at key2storytelling. It's different than the book because the book's not interactive, for one thing. I mean, we get comments from the Instagram reels, we get comments from the newsletter, and that's really rewarding, is that back and forth. We give notes to people on their scripts, and then that's a back and forth conversation. And that's really wonderful, is to talk to people about their scripts and then get the next draft and see that they've improved it. And that just feels great. And that didn't happen with the book because the book was not an interactive thing. One difference between the book and Key to Storytelling is the book came out a long time ago, and I'm a better writer now. I've critiqued more screenplays now, and I've taught a whole lot more students since the book came out. And now I've got a business partner, Hillary, and she brings her experience to it. So there are two people involved in this soup of creating and helping people learn how to be better writers. And so that's one difference between Key to Storytelling and the book, is there's just so much more material. And we've got a screenwriting class called Screenwriting Essentials that has built on what I knew when I wrote Your Screenplay Sucks, but it's like umpteen more years of experience, and so the course is way better than I could have ever taught at the time that I wrote the book. So that's been fun. One thing about the Screenwriting Essentials course is that the book doesn't do is it walks you through step-by-step process of making a story into a movie. And there are 10 lessons in the thing, and each lesson's got a workbook and homework assignments. And so you walk down this road, and we're there beside you in a writable PDF that we created. We're not actually there, except for once a week, everybody can get together with Hillary and me for a 1 hour a week Zoom office hours, and you can talk to us about your writing. And that's been very, very helpful to the people that are in the course. And so that's been fun. And again, dealing with people, I really like to teach. I inherited the helper gene from my father. And so getting in a group on Zoom with people from all over the world and hearing what they want to know about their story, I really like doing that. And so that's a great pleasure for me with Key to Storytelling that didn't really come from the book or come with the book, because the book, again, was a static object.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that, because Spencer and I both have an online presence. We both spend maybe more than you, a little bit too much time on Instagram. And I love flipping through that page. I love the 30-second kind of, okay, here's the thing. And then we break it down. And I learn something. I save videos. I love it. I'm a huge fan of the course.
Do you get the newsletter?
I don't know if I do get the newsletter.
Oh, you know, because you would be better looking and taller, and you'd be a better writer and have an Oscar already. So you obviously don't get the newsletter.
I don't get the newsletter.
If you go to our Instagram page and go to our bio, you click on, there's a link in the bio to get the newsletter. And so that's every Sunday afternoon. It's 2 topics of conversation, and then there's a thing that I think is really interesting called Can You Fix This? And so there's a teeny section of a screenplay, like a quarter of a page, that's there, and then you read it in the newsletter, and it says, what would you do to fix this? And then you click on it, and we walk you through step by step what our minds think of. We think of this first, then this first, and then this first, and then this first, and finally it's fixed. And
That's
what's
amazing,
mind-blowing is how many things can be wrong with a quarter-page scene or 2 lines of dialogue. And so that's one of the things that's in the newsletter that's really unique. I've never seen that anywhere, that I wish someone had taught me that. All this stuff that I know about writing and writing tight, clear, concise, compelling sentences, I learned by doing and reading other screenplays and writing and getting beaten over the head by my teachers and just trial and error. And so that's really a big part of the newsletter that Hillary and I are really, really pleased with.
So, Will, you have an incredible wealth of knowledge and wisdom, and I'm hoping that we've been able to get you to share some of that today. Are there any questions that you think we should have asked that could potentially help our viewers understand more about screenwriting, or any lessons you've learned that might be important to them or us?
Wow.
That was good. That wasn't even on the page. That was really good, bro.
Yeah, man, I'm just sitting here stumped. What did you miss? You asked a lot of good questions. What's my bank account number so you can wire me money? I think that's a good question to ask. Or Venmo me money. What do you? Let me ask you this: what do you think? Just bouncing off of my question, what do you think people in your school, your classmates, people at school, they need to know about having to do with writing?
I actually think it's your goal, William. I think the understanding that this is a difficult profession is, I think, something we forget about. Now, we're blindsided by our youth, and I'm the first to admit that. But I also think we forget how hard it is to do this. We're honored to tell our stories, our short films, and the places we want to go are far. It's easy to put pen to paper.
You need to, in everything you do, in your school, your classmates, the podcast, whatever, you need to do the best possible job you can do. And push yourself to do the best job you can do. So when I was in the editing room in the very first semester, and the way you edited was you had a piece of Super 8 film and another piece of Super 8 film, and you stuck them together and you laid them in the thing called a splicing block, and you took a little piece of tape over it and you laid it around the top and you wrapped it around the bottom, and it held it, and the tape had sprocket holes, so when you turned it this way, the film would go through the projector, and the piece of tape over the film would go through the projector, and it'd keep on going. Mm-hmm. So that's what I did. I taped them up and I ran them. I saw Greg in the editing room. This is Super 8 film. It's like that wide. In the editing room, taking film cleaner, and just before he put the tape down on the piece of film, he cleaned that one frame here and that one frame there, cleaned them both sides, laid them down, stuck them together, and then put the tape on them. So his tape splices were clean. That blew my mind, and that was a long time ago. It still blows my mind. I'd never saw anybody ever do that. So he took attention to detail to a very high level in everything he did. And that one little thing, that was his natural way to do things, was to be as good as he could possibly be. So that would be a question that you should ask me, is how can people be as good as they can possibly be? And I'd say be like Greg, which if you're not like Greg, pretend you're like Greg. There's a great book written a jillion years ago called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale
Love
Carnegie.
that book. I love that book.
So when I was 16, my parents kind of despaired about me, and they sent me to take a Dale Carnegie course. And so it was all these 40-year-old business people and me. I was 16. And one of the things they would do at the end of the class, which is great advice, is everybody would stand up, and it was like rah-rah, but I thought it was pretty cool at the time. Everybody yelled together, act enthusiastic, and you'll be enthusiastic. That's a lot of the Dale Carnegie thing. Man, that works in Hollywood. It works in life. Act enthusiastic about this thing you're doing, like Greg Fonseca cleaning his splices and the splice tape, and you'll be enthusiastic. I think that's, attention to detail. You can learn how to do that. You can learn to get better at that stuff, but you just have to want to do it.
Yeah, I think that's incredible advice, because I think we do see a lot of times our peers adopt this mindset of, let's just check the box. Let's finish the thing we have to finish, and that's that. But fundamentally in the career we're trying to do, in this idea of storytelling and filmmaking, the exceptional is what works. And so a lot of people often
That's what they pay for.
Right. And we see a lot of people try to take shortcuts, but I think it's this idea that the shortcut is actually the long way. The shortcut to success, to achieving whatever impact you want to have, is caring about all of these little details. And so I think that's something we need to remind ourselves often of, because, we probably have at one point settled for something in a film or in a podcast episode that could have been leveled up. And so I think, thank you for sharing that, and we'll be sure to keep that top of mind.
Okay, one piece of advice that I gave my students all the time, and I'll give to you all, it's the simplest advice for doing well in college or in life, is start early. You have a class that's on Thursday, the next homework assignment is due next Thursday morning when you walk into class. Thursday night, don't do anything. Forget about it. You got through the class, be happy. Friday morning, the day after class, read the assignment. You wouldn't believe how many people read the assignment the night before it's due, as opposed to reading it Friday morning. Because if the assignment is build a house, you on Wednesday night before Thursday, you have not bought the land that you got to build the house on, you're in trouble. But if you read the assignment Friday morning and you know what and read it out loud and go over it and make sure you understand every single piece of that assignment, because sometimes assignments are complicated. If you understand every single thing in that assignment Friday morning, you've got all this time to get it figured out and get it done. And have a draft of your homework, whatever it is, by Monday or Sunday night. Take Monday off. Now you got Tuesday and Wednesday to refine it. As opposed to, I'm going to start Wednesday afternoon for my homework I got to finish by Wednesday night. First of all, that makes your blood pressure go up, that's not good. But if you start early, you're going to stay out of so much trouble.
That's incredible. I really appreciate you sharing all of that. So, are we going to briefcase?
I think we are.
Okay, so every single episode here on this show, we are presented with a question, either from our audience or for Luka, and we don't know what it is. Neither Taye and I know, you don't know, and so we're about to find out what this question is.
I'm very scared.
Luka?
So I just want to know, all three of you, what is the best screenplay you've ever read? Not necessarily what's your favorite film, but what is the best screenplay you've ever read?
Okay. What is the best screenplay we've ever read?
Who should go first?
Oh, there's 3 people get to answer the question.
That's correct.
Okay, well,
That's
you're
correct.
young and your brains are nimble. You go first, and my slow machinery will be figuring out my answer.
I will admit, I haven't read a ton of screenplays, and from this conversation, I think one of my takeaways is I need to read more. But one that stands out to me is, I think last year I read the screenplay for Marriage Story, which is a film that cannot hide behind epic action, epic stunts, cool space fights. and it's so grounded in dialogue that there's no hiding bad dialogue. There's no hiding anything not working. And so I was truly blown away by how compelling that writing was for something that had to be so grounded in reality.
That's a good answer. It's a great answer. Yes.
Okay, what about you?
Okay, I think for me, we all know this movie. Luka knows my answer. I read Do the Right Thing for the first time, I think last year, for a project. And I was, first of all, astounded by how funny the great Spike Lee is, and how some of his writing is just for him and the people who read the screenplay. But the descriptions were so specific. The intro on Samuel L. Jackson's lips were so, just exactly what you would want out of the pen that is Spike Lee. So I think for that, just the humor alone in his description, he knew exactly what he wanted and held nothing back in his writing. I think that's my answer.
Spike Lee can really write.
He really can.
Oof. What was the one about the Five Bloods? Did you that script
Yes.
was really good. He's really good. I think my favorite script is a screenplay called Stand By Me. Oh, it's just so good. It's based on a Stephen King short story, and it's also proof. Well, then suddenly I thought of another best script I ever read. To Kill a Mockingbird.
You can have two answers.
Is really good, but both of those are adaptations actually, and the Stand By Me is from a short story. To Kill a Mockingbird is from a novel. Ooh, yeah. Short stories sometimes make better movies because the whole thing is right there and it's in front of you. A novel, because a movie is really about one thing and one thing only. And so a novel's got all these parts to it, and you have to sometimes throw things away. And I stayed up for days back in the days of VHS tape, if you can imagine, and watched To Kill a Mockingbird and had the paperback book, which I've got somewhere up there on my shelf. And I marked every single thing that was in the screenplay out of the book. And it was really interesting because he took like a piece of dialogue from page 50 and another piece of dialogue from page 90, and in the script, they connect. Wow. So it was this amazing jigsaw puzzle of putting things together. And so a lot of the screenplay is the book, but he masterfully put it all together. But Stand By Me is just a piece of perfection. It's so good. The movie's great. The story's so strong. The emotions are so strong. It's delightful to read. It's really wonderful.
Will, thank you so much for sitting down with us here today.
You're welcome.
We've learned so much. It feels like we've. All I want to do now is write a script. So, I think after that's probably what we're going to be doing. But for anyone listening who wants to read your book or learn more about what you're doing, where can they find you and all your stuff?
Well, the book, Your Screenplay Sucks, 100 Ways to Make It Great. My suggestion would be go down to your local bookstore and order it, and then it'll show up. I'm a big fan of local bookstores. I've got one a mile and a half from my house that I go to a lot. Key to Storytelling, we're online. We've got a screenwriting class called Screenwriting Essentials. So you go to T-O, not the number 2, key2storytelling.com and click on course, and it's there. We also give script notes. And the Screenwriting Essentials class is there, which we are very proud of. So it's key2storytelling.com or at key2storytelling on Instagram. And if you go to the link in the bio, you can get the newsletter, which is free.
If you want to continue learning, we have another episode that we think you would love, and you can click it on screen right now. Thank you.